Where did you learn that song? William Harrington whispered, but the words barely made it past his throat, because the melody drifting through the rain outside his mansion was not supposed to exist anymore. It was a little after 7 on a Thursday evening in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of evening when the sky turned the color of pewter and the old oak trees along King Street leaned heavy with water. Harrington House stood behind its black iron gates, all white columns, glowing windows, and quiet wealth, while inside, polished floors reflected the light of 100 soft lamps prepared for the 9th memorial dinner of Clara Harrington, William's late wife. Crystal glasses waited untouched on the dining table. White roses filled silver vases in every room. Staff moved carefully, almost silently, because every person who had worked for William long enough knew that this night hollowed him out. At 58, William Harrington was one of the richest real estate developers in the Southeast, a man whose name sat on hotels, hospitals, office towers, and museum wings, but grief had made him smaller in ways no tailor could hide. His tuxedo fit perfectly, yet his shoulders looked tired. His silver hair was combed back, his cuff links were fastened, and his expression was the same calm mask he wore in boardrooms when millions of dollars were at stake. But then the song began. It came from somewhere beyond the front lawn, thin and trembling through the rain, carried between the bars of the gate like a secret looking for a way in. William stopped halfway down the grand staircase. One hand gripped the banister. Around him, the house seemed to hold its breath. The opening notes were simple, almost like a lullaby, but they struck him with such force that his chest tightened. Clara had written that song when they were young, before the money, before the magazines, before the family name became something people lowered their voices around. She used to hum it in the kitchen of their first apartment when the air conditioner rattled and they could barely afford dinner out. Later, when cancer had thinned her voice but not her kindness, she sang it only to him. In the private blue hours before dawn, no record existed, no sheet music, no public performance. No one outside their marriage should have known it. Yet there it was, rising from the wet street beyond his gates, sung by a child. The butler, Mr. Ellison, turned from the foyer with a concerned look. "Sir." William did not answer. He walked past the waiting guests, past the portrait of Clara in her ivory dress, past the bowl of white rose petals placed beneath it every year. His steps were slow at first, then faster, the sound of his dress shoes sharp against the marble. The closer he came to the front doors, the clearer the voice became. It was small, young, and careful, as if the singer was afraid the song might break if she held it too tightly. When William pushed open the door, cool rain swept across the threshold. The security guard at the end of the drive turned quickly, startled by his employer stepping into the weather without an umbrella. "Mr. Harrington, I was just about to check the gate." William lifted one hand, not to silence him harshly, but because he could not bear another sound over that melody. Under the amber streetlight beyond the iron bars stood a little black girl, maybe 8 years old, with brown skin shining softly under the rain and her hair braided close to her scalp in neat rows tied with 2 faded yellow ribbons. She wore a denim jacket too thin for the weather, a purple backpack with one strap patched by gray tape, and sneakers darkened by puddles. She was not begging. She was not calling out. She stood with both hands wrapped around the strap of a worn canvas tote, singing toward the garden of white roses as if someone had told her exactly where to face. William reached the gate and stopped 3 feet from her. For a moment, he could only stare. The girl's eyes were closed, her lashes wet, her voice wavering but steady enough to finish the line Clara had always saved for the end, the line she once pressed against William's heart like a promise. "When the world gets cold, follow the roses home." William's breath caught so sharply that the guard looked at him in alarm. The girl opened her eyes. She froze when she saw him, not with guilt, but with the startled caution of a child who knew adults could misunderstand almost anything. Her fingers tightened around the tote bag. William had faced senators, judges, union leaders, angry investors, and rooms full of cameras, but he had never felt as unprepared as he did standing in the rain before this small stranger. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked again, softer this time. The girl blinked up at him through the bars. For several seconds, only the rain answered, ticking against the iron gate, whispering over the leaves, running in thin streams along the curb. "My mama taught it to me," she said at last. Her voice was polite, careful, and southern in the gentle way Charleston children sometimes sounded when they had been raised to say, "Sir," even to people who frightened them. William swallowed. "What is your name?" "Naomi Brooks, sir." The name meant nothing to him, and somehow that made the moment worse. He looked past her to the empty sidewalk, then down the quiet street lined with old homes and dripping trees. No adult stood nearby. No car waited with headlights on. "Naomi," he said, testing the name as if it might open some hidden door in his memory. "Why are you standing outside my house?" She glanced toward the mansion, and for the first time he saw that her face held not only caution, but purpose. "My mama said if things ever got too hard, I should come where the white roses grow." William felt the rain slide down the back of his neck, cold and real, but he did not move. "Your mother knows this house?" Naomi shook her head. "She never came here. She just had a picture." "A picture of what?" "The garden," Naomi said, "and a lady standing beside it. A kind lady." William's pulse seemed to slow. Behind him, at the open front door, a few guests had gathered in silence, their dark suits and pearl necklaces glowing in the warm light. Margaret Vale, William's younger sister, stepped onto the porch, her expression tightening the moment she saw the child at the gate. "William," she called, controlled but sharp, "come inside. You're getting soaked." He did not turn around. Naomi heard the woman's voice and lowered her eyes. Rain dripped from the ends of her braids. William noticed then that she was shivering, not dramatically, not to invite pity, but because the March night had teeth and her jacket had no business pretending to be a coat. Something in him shifted. Not healed, not yet, but disturbed from its long sleep. "Who was the lady in the picture?" he asked. Naomi reached into her tote bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper sealed inside a clear sandwich bag to keep it dry. She held it carefully, as if it were worth more than the mansion behind him. "Mama said her name was Miss Clara," she whispered. The world narrowed to the sound of rain and that name. William's hand went slack at his side. For 9 years, people had spoken Clara's name gently around him, with practiced sympathy, as if it belonged to a room full of flowers and condolences. But from Naomi's mouth, it sounded alive. Margaret came down the porch steps now. "William, don't." That one word slipped too quickly from her, too full of warning. William finally looked back at his sister, and in her face he saw something he had missed before: fear. Not concern. Fear. He turned to the guard. "Open the gate." Margaret's heels struck the wet stone path behind him. "You cannot invite a strange child into this house in the middle of an event." Naomi straightened slightly, her small chin lifting. "I don't have to come in, sir. I only came to sing. Mama said if the song belonged here, someone would know." William looked at her, at the yellow ribbons, at the protected paper in her hand, at the old tote bag pressed to her chest like a shield made of memory. The rain blurred the mansion lights behind him until they looked like stars trapped in glass. For the first time in 9 years, the song Clara left behind had returned, not from a piano, not from a record, not from a dream, but from a little girl standing outside his locked gate. The iron bars began to part with a low metallic groan. William stepped forward, removed his black evening coat, and held it open across the space between them. "Naomi," he said, his voice unsteady but kind, "I think you and I need to talk about my wife." Naomi stepped through the opening gate, as though crossing into a place she had only visited in a dream. William's black evening coat rested around her shoulders, far too large for her narrow frame, the hem nearly brushing her knees, but she held it closed with both hands and walked carefully along the wet stone path. The mansion rose before her in warm gold light, with tall windows shining through the rain and white roses bending under silver drops on either side of the walkway. She did not stare with greed or wonder. She looked at everything the way a child looks at a church, respectfully, quietly, as if the walls might be listening. William walked beside her without touching her, matching his pace to her smaller steps. Behind them, Margaret followed with a tight expression, her arms folded beneath the porch light. "This is unnecessary," she said, low enough that the guests inside could not hear, but sharp enough for William to feel every word. "A song is not evidence. Children hear things. People teach them things." William stopped at the foot of the porch and turned toward her. Rain glistened on his hair, but his face had gone still. No one knew that song. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. For a brief second, The only sound was the rain tapping against the copper gutters. Naomi looked from one adult to the other and hugged the canvas tote closer to her chest. "I can leave, sir," she said. "I did not mean to cause trouble." William's expression softened at once. He knelt on one knee, so his eyes met hers through the porch light. It was an awkward movement for a man in a tuxedo on wet stone, but he did it without hesitation. "You are not trouble, Naomi." The words seemed to surprise both of them. Naomi blinked, then gave a small nod, not quite trusting comfort yet, but hearing it. William stood and opened the front door himself. Warmth rolled out from the foyer, carrying the scent of roses, polished wood, and lemon candles. Conversation stopped the moment Naomi entered. A dozen wealthy guests turned toward her, their faces carefully blank, their curiosity poorly hidden. Some looked at William's coat around her shoulders. Some looked at her taped backpack. Some looked at the folded paper protected in the plastic bag. Naomi lowered her eyes, but she did not shrink. Her yellow ribbons were damp. Her sneakers left tiny marks on the marble, and yet there was something steady about the way she walked beside William Harrington that made the room uncomfortable in its own silence. Mr. Ellison appeared with a towel and a soft gray blanket. "For the young ladies, sir," he said gently. Naomi glanced at William for permission before accepting them. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are welcome, Miss Brooks," Mr. Ellison replied, and the formality made Naomi look up in surprise, as if she had not expected anyone in that house to place dignity in front of her name. William led her away from the staring guests toward a smaller sitting room off the foyer, the one Clara had once called the Blue Room because of the pale wallpaper and the view of the rose garden beyond the French doors. A fire burned low in the marble fireplace. On the mantel sat a framed photograph of Clara Harrington, laughing beneath a wide-brimmed hat, her hand resting on a white rosebush in full bloom. Naomi stopped in the doorway. Her breath changed. William noticed immediately. "You know that picture?" he asked. Naomi did not answer right away. She stepped closer, still wrapped in his coat, and stared up at Clara's face. "That is the lady," she said quietly. William felt something inside him tilt. "The lady from your mother's picture?" Naomi nodded. Margaret entered behind them before William could speak. "That photograph was published years ago in a charity magazine. Anyone could have found it." William did not take his eyes off Naomi. "Was the picture your mother had from a magazine?" Naomi shook her head. "No, sir. It was smaller. Old. The corners were bent." She reached carefully into her tote bag, moving aside a small hairbrush, a library book, and a folded sweater. Then she pulled out the protected paper and held it toward him. "Mama said I should only show this if someone knew the song." William took the plastic bag, as if it contained something fragile enough to vanish. His fingers trembled while he opened it. Inside was a photograph, faded and creased down the middle. Clara stood in the white rose garden, younger than in the portrait, wearing a blue cardigan William remembered with painful clarity. Beside her stood a young black woman with kind eyes and one hand resting lightly over her stomach. On the back, written in Clara's unmistakable looping handwriting, were 4 words, "For the child someday." William stared until the fire blurred. The room seemed to recede around him. He knew Clara's handwriting better than his own signature. He had read it on birthday cards, grocery lists, hospital notes, and the last letter she had left on his nightstand. This was hers. No doubt. No mercy in the certainty of it. Margaret moved closer, her voice lower now. "William, give that to me." He looked at her then, slowly. "Why?" "Because you are upset, and this child has clearly been sent here with a story designed to open old wounds." Naomi's face tightened, but she spoke before William could defend her. "My mama did not send me for money." Her voice was small, but not weak. "She said if I ever came here, I should sing first, because a good man would remember love before he remembered fear." The words struck William with such force that his hand closed around the edge of the photograph. Clara would have said something like that. Clara, who never let his family name become bigger than his conscience. Clara, who used to stop on sidewalks to speak to people everyone else stepped around. Clara, who had carried secrets quietly, not because she was dishonest, but because she believed timing could be an act of mercy. William sat down heavily in the armchair near the fire. For a moment, he looked older than 58. Naomi stood a few feet away, watching him with concern beyond her years. "Mr. Harrington," she asked, "did I do something wrong?" He looked up at once. "No," His voice broke on the word, and he cleared his throat. No, Naomi. You did exactly what someone trusted you to do. Margaret's face hardened. Outside the sitting room, the memorial guests murmured in the foyer like distant water. Inside, the fire snapped softly, and the photograph lay between two worlds, the one William had survived, and the one Clara had apparently left unfinished. He turned the photo over again, tracing the handwriting without touching the ink. Where is your mother tonight? Naomi's lips pressed together. Working late at the laundry on Meeting Street. She does not know I came. William inhaled slowly, fighting the instinct to demand answers from the child when the truth clearly belonged to adults. Then we will call her, he said. And until she gets here, you will be warm, safe, and treated with respect in this house. Margaret stepped forward. William, think carefully. He looked at his sister, and the room changed temperature around his stare. I am thinking carefully. Then he looked back at Naomi, at the rain still shining on her braids, at the coat wrapped around her like a borrowed shelter, at the song that had crossed 9 years of silence to reach his gate. Naomi, he said gently, when your mother taught you that song, did she ever tell you why Miss Clara gave it to her? Naomi looked down at her bracelet, a thin silver band William had not noticed until that moment, half hidden beneath the oversized sleeve of his coat. She touched it with her thumb. She said some songs are not for singing pretty, Naomi whispered. Some songs are for finding your way home. William noticed the bracelet because Naomi touched it as if it could answer for her. The silver band was thin, dull with age, and too large for her wrist, so it slid toward the back of her small hand whenever she moved. For one breath, William only saw a piece of old jewelry. Then the firelight caught the inside curve, and something in his memory opened with a soundless crack. Clara had worn a bracelet like that during their first year of marriage, a simple silver band he had bought from a small shop near the Charleston City Market when he could not afford anything finer. He remembered apologizing for how plain it was, and Clara laughing as she slipped it on. She had told him love did not need diamonds to prove it had weight. William leaned forward, his voice careful. May I see your bracelet, Naomi? The child looked at him, then down at the band. She did not pull away, but she did not offer it quickly either. That hesitation told William more than words. This was not decoration to her. This was history. My mama said I should not take it off unless I had to, Naomi said. Then you do not have to, William replied at once. Just turn your wrist a little, if that feels all right. Naomi studied his face, perhaps searching for impatience, perhaps for the kind of hunger adults sometimes had when they wanted answers more than they cared about the person holding them. She must have found neither, because she slowly lifted her wrist. William bent closer. On the inside of the bracelet, nearly worn smooth, he saw a line of tiny engraved words. For the song Only We Know. The room tilted around him. He remembered standing in that little shop nearly 35 years earlier, young and proud and nervous, asking the jeweler if 8 words would fit. He remembered Clara reading the engraving and pressing the bracelet to her heart. He remembered the day after her funeral, when he had asked Margaret whether she had seen it, because it was not in Clara's jewelry box. Margaret had told him grief made people misplace things. Now that same bracelet rested on the wrist of an 8-year-old girl who had appeared at his gate, singing the private melody of his marriage. William slowly sat back, his face pale under the warm light. Margaret's voice cut through the silence. Many bracelets look alike. William did not look at her. Not with those words. Naomi's eyes moved between them. Is it bad? No, William said, though his throat had tightened. It is not bad. His gaze softened. It belonged to Clara. Naomi looked down with a kind of wonder, not the excitement of owning something valuable, but the solemn surprise of realizing that an old promise had a name. Mama said Miss Clara gave it to her before I was born. Margaret stepped nearer to the fire, her shadow long across the blue rug. A grieving woman may have given away many things. That does not mean this child has any connection to us. William finally turned toward his sister. Us. The single word was quiet, but Margaret heard the accusation inside it. Her posture stiffened. To this family, she corrected. To Clara's memory. William stood. Clara's memory is not a locked room, Margaret. Naomi watched him closely, her hands folded over the bracelet now. The fire made soft clicking sounds, and beyond the sitting room, the memorial guests had grown restless. Mr. Ellison appeared in the doorway, holding a cordless house phone and a clean towel. "Sir, I located the number for Brooks Laundry on Meeting Street. A woman named Elise is on the line." Naomi's entire face changed. "My mama." "Yes, Miss Brooks," Mr. Ellison said gently. William took the phone, but before speaking, he lowered it and looked at Naomi. "Would you like to talk to her first?" Naomi nodded quickly, and when he handed it over, she held the phone with both hands. "Mama." Her voice shrank into something younger. "I am okay. I am at the big house with the roses." A pause. Then Naomi's shoulders tightened. "No, ma'am, I did not get on a bus. I walked from the corner after school, but I stayed on the main streets like you said." William closed his eyes for a second, not from anger at the child, but from the sharp understanding that this small journey had been planned with courage and fear woven together. Naomi listened, then glanced at William. "He knows the song, Mama." Another pause, longer this time. The fire seemed to dim. Naomi held the phone away slightly. "She wants to speak to you." William accepted it. "This is William Harrington." At first, there was only breathing on the other end, unsteady and quiet. Then a woman's voice said, "I told her not to go unless she truly needed to." William looked toward Naomi, standing in his oversized coat with rain drying on her braids. "Mrs. Brooks, she is safe here." "Miss Brooks," the woman corrected softly. "Elise Brooks." "Miss Brooks," he said, "your daughter showed me a photograph. And a bracelet." Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. A silence heavy with something long carried. "Then Clara was right," Elise whispered. William gripped the phone harder. "Right about what?" Elise exhaled shakily. "That if Naomi ever found you with the song, you would know she was not lying." The room went absolutely still. Even Margaret did not speak. William turned slightly away, toward Clara's photograph on the mantel. Her smile seemed almost unbearable now. "How did you know my wife?" he asked. Elise did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice sounded tired, careful, and full of old gratitude. "I was 19 when I met her. I was working nights at a diner off Savannah Highway, trying to keep my life together. Clara came in after a charity meeting. She saw me studying for my nursing entrance exam between tables, and instead of treating me like background noise, she asked my name." William pictured Clara doing exactly that, leaning across a counter with kind eyes, making a stranger feel seen in less than a minute. Elise continued, "She helped me apply for a training program. She brought groceries when I was too proud to ask. She told me pride was beautiful, but it did not have to stand outside in the cold." Naomi listened with wide eyes. Some of this, William realized, was new to her too. "But the photograph," William said. "The bracelet. The song." Elise's voice trembled. "Those came later. When Clara got sick, she called me to the garden. She said there were things in the Harrington house that had been buried under good manners and old fear. She said if anything happened to her before she could make it right, I should keep the song alive." William's breathing slowed. "Make what right?" On the other end, Elise gave a small, pained sound. "I cannot explain it over the phone. Not with Naomi standing there. Not with your guests in the house." Margaret spoke suddenly, too loud. "How convenient." Naomi flinched at the sharpness of the voice, but she did not step back. William looked at Margaret, and something colder than anger settled into his face. Then he spoke into the phone again. "Miss Brooks, I will send a car for you." "No," Elise said quickly. "I can get there. It is raining, and your daughter is here. Please allow me this." Another silence followed, but this one softened. "All right." William handed the phone back to Mr. Ellison and gave instructions in a low voice. A driver would go to Meeting Street. Elise Brooks would be brought through the side entrance, away from the staring memorial guests. When he turned back, Naomi was still watching Clara's photograph. "Did she really sing it to you?" she asked. William came to stand beside her. The white roses beyond the French doors shivered under the rain. "Yes," he said, "for many years." Naomi nodded slowly. Then maybe she was not gone all the way. William looked down at her, and for the first time that night, grief did not feel like a wall. It felt like a door, and a child with a silver bracelet had just placed her hand on the handle. The house waited with its breath held after the call ended. Outside the blue room, the memorial dinner had become a strange, suspended thing, with guests speaking in lowered voices beneath Clara's portrait and pretending not to wonder why William Harrington had disappeared with a little girl from the gate. Inside, the fire settled into red coals, The rain washed softly against the French doors, and Naomi sat on the edge of a velvet chair with both feet tucked close together so her wet sneakers would not touch the rug. William noticed and said nothing at first. He simply moved a small brass tray from beside the fireplace and placed it under her shoes, preserving her dignity without making a speech out of it. Naomi gave him a quick, grateful look. Margaret saw the exchange and looked away. Mr. Ellison returned with a mug of warm cocoa and a plate with 2 buttered biscuits, setting them on the low table before Naomi as carefully as if he were serving a visiting dignitary. "Thank you, sir," Naomi whispered. "You are very welcome," he said. She reached for the mug, but paused, glancing at William. "It is yours," he told her gently. "You do not have to ask permission to be warm." Something flickered across her face, surprise first, then a kind of careful relief. She took a small sip, both hands wrapped around the mug, the silver bracelet sliding again toward her knuckles. William sat across from her, the faded photograph resting on his knee. He had looked at it at least a dozen times in the past 10 minutes, and each time Clara's handwriting seemed to grow louder. For the child someday. Not for Elise. Not for charity. Not for memory. For the child. Margaret stood near the mantel beneath Clara's framed smile, her posture elegant and rigid. "William, before this goes any further, I think we should send the guests home and speak privately tomorrow." "The guests will leave when I ask them to leave," William said. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a door closing. "Right now, I am waiting for Elise Brooks." Margaret's eyes flashed. "You are letting an unknown woman walk into Clara's memorial and rewrite your grief with an old photograph." Naomi lowered her mug. "My mama would not do that." Margaret looked at the child as if she had forgotten Naomi could answer. William leaned forward. "Naomi is allowed to speak in this room." The words were quiet, but they changed the air. Naomi sat a little straighter, still polite, still cautious, but no longer invisible. Margaret pressed her lips together. "I am protecting you." "From whom?" William asked. "From a child with a song?" Margaret's face tightened. "From people who know exactly which wound to touch." For the first time, William saw how rehearsed her concern sounded. The softness was there, the family loyalty, the careful tone, but beneath it ran a current of urgency that did not belong to love alone. He turned back to Naomi. "Your mother said Clara wanted to make something right. Did she ever tell you anything else?" Naomi shook her head slowly. "Not everything. Mama said grown-up truth is heavy, and children should not have to carry all of it." William's face softened at the answer. "Your mother sounds wise." "She is," Naomi said. Then, after a pause, "she sings when she is tired. Not loud. Just enough so the room does not feel empty." William looked toward the rain-streaked glass. Clara did that too. Naomi seemed to consider this connection seriously, not as something magical, but as something that deserved respect. Did she like white roses because of the garden? William almost smiled. She said red roses asked for attention, but white roses knew how to listen. Naomi looked toward the French doors, where the garden glowed faintly through the storm. "That sounds like Miss Clara." Margaret turned sharply. "You never met Clara." Naomi did not argue. She simply touched the bracelet. "No, ma'am. But some people leave enough kindness behind for you to know them anyway." The sentence landed with such quiet force that even Margaret had no answer. William stared at the girl, and something in his chest ached with recognition. Not because she looked like Clara, not because she belonged to wealth or blood or any proof he could name yet, but because she carried Clara's way of making a room face itself. A few minutes later, headlights swept across the rain outside. William stood at once. Naomi set down the cocoa, suddenly alert. Through the French doors, beyond the blurred reflection of the fire, a black Harrington car rolled slowly along the side drive. "That is her," Naomi said, already rising. William moved toward the hall, but Margaret stepped into his path. "Please," she said, no longer sharp, almost pleading now. "Do not do this in front of the child." William studied her. "Do what?" Margaret swallowed. In the gold light of the hallway, she looked older than she had an hour before. "Dig up things that should have stayed settled." He stared at his sister for one long second. Settled for whom? Before she could answer, Mr. Ellison opened the side door. A woman in a navy laundromat uniform stepped in, rain shining on the shoulders of her coat, one hand pressed to her chest, as if she had been holding her breath the whole ride. Elise Brooks was in her early 30s, with tired eyes, careful posture, and the kind of dignity that did not ask a room for permission. Naomi ran to her, not wildly, but with the fierce relief of a child reaching the safest place she knew. Elise knelt and wrapped her arms around her daughter, closing her eyes for one brief second. "You scared me, baby," she whispered. "I know," Naomi said. "I am sorry." But he knew the song. Elise opened her eyes and looked over Naomi's shoulder at William. The hallway seemed to narrow between them. For years, William had imagined that the past was a house with locked rooms, and he held every key that mattered. Now this woman stood in his doorway carrying a truth Clara had trusted to someone else. He stepped forward slowly. "Miss Brooks." Elise rose, keeping one hand on Naomi's shoulder. "Mr. Harrington." Her voice was respectful, but not submissive. "I did not send her tonight." "I believe you." Elise blinked, as if she had prepared herself for disbelief and did not know what to do with its absence. William held up the faded photograph. "But Clara sent something." Elise looked at the picture, and her face changed with such grief and affection that William no longer doubted she had known his wife. "She gave me that in the garden," Elise said softly. 3 weeks before she passed. Margaret stepped from the blue room into the hall. Elise saw her, and every bit of warmth drained from her expression. "You," Elise whispered. William turned to his sister. Margaret went still. Naomi looked up at her mother. "Mama." Elise pulled Naomi a little closer, not out of fear, but protection from words too old for her. William's voice dropped. "You two know each other?" Elise did not take her eyes off Margaret. "Yes," she said. "She came to my apartment after Clara died." Margaret's face paled. "Elise. She told me never to contact this family." Elise continued, each word measured, each one heavy. "She said Clara was gone. Mr. Harrington was broken, and the kindest thing I could do was disappear with the song, the bracelet, and everything Clara had tried to leave behind." The rain tapped harder against the windows. Naomi's hand closed around her bracelet. William looked at Margaret, and for the first time that night, his grief had company. It stood beside disbelief, and both of them were looking directly at his sister. Margaret did not deny it, and that was the first answer William received. She stood beneath the hallway chandelier with one hand resting against the doorframe, her pearls bright at her throat, her face arranged into dignity, while her silence broke apart everything he thought he knew. Elise kept one hand on Naomi's shoulder, not gripping, not hiding her, simply reminding the child that she was not alone in a room full of power. William looked from Elise to Margaret, then back to the faded photograph in his hand. "Everyone else leaves," he said quietly. Mr. Ellison understood before anyone moved. Within minutes, the memorial guests were guided toward the front entrance with umbrellas, coats, and careful explanations about a private family matter. There, murmurs drifted through the foyer like leaves across marble. Some looked disappointed to miss the drama. Others looked ashamed for wanting to know. William did not watch them go. He stood in the hallway with the photograph, the bracelet, the song, and the woman his wife had trusted when her own house had failed her. When the last car pulled away from the circular drive, Harrington House grew enormous in its quiet. Rain tapped at the windows. The white roses outside bent under the storm. William led everyone back into the blue room, but the room no longer felt like Clara's memorial. It felt like a place where truth had finally found a chair. Naomi sat beside Elise on the small sofa. William took the armchair opposite them. Margaret remained standing near the mantel, as if sitting would make the moment too permanent. "Start from the beginning," William said. His voice held no threat, but it left no room for performance. Elise drew a slow breath. "I met Clara at the diner, the way I told you. She helped me with school applications. She checked on me when I was pregnant. She never made me feel small for needing help." Naomi looked up at her mother. "You never told me all that." Elise brushed a gentle hand over Naomi's damp braids. "I wanted you to know kindness before you knew the burden behind it." William's eyes lowered. "What burden?" Elise looked at Clara's photograph on the mantel. Clara found out something near the end of her life. Something about a family trust, an old agreement, and a child who was supposed to be protected by it. Margaret's head snapped up. "That is not your story to tell." William turned toward her. "It became her story when you visited her apartment and told her to disappear." Margaret's face tightened, but again she did not deny it. Elise reached into her work bag, a plain brown purse still damp from the rain, and removed a folded envelope wrapped in clear plastic. The paper inside had yellowed at the edges, and the handwriting on the front was Clara's. William's name crossed the envelope in blue ink. He stared at it, but did not touch it yet. "She told me to keep this safe," Elise said. "She said if Naomi ever had to find you, I should. Let the song open the door first, then the bracelet, then this letter." William's fingers flexed on his knee. "Why did you wait?" The question came out rougher than he intended. Naomi looked at him quickly, but Elise did not flinch. "Because I was young, scared, and tired, and because your sister made it very clear that people like me would be painted as opportunists before anyone listened." William closed his eyes. The word landed hard because he knew the world Elise described. He had seen charity boards praise struggling families from a stage, then question their motives in private rooms over catered dinners. He had been in those rooms. He had not always spoken. "I am sorry," he said. Elise looked surprised, then carefully still. "You did not know. That does not excuse what my name may have done." Naomi watched him with quiet attention, as if measuring whether apology was a thing adults used or a thing they meant. William reached for the envelope. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. On the back, Clara had sealed it with a small pressed white rose under clear tape. He did not open it right away. Instead, he looked at Margaret. "Did you know about this?" Margaret's eyes shone, but her voice remained controlled. "I knew Clara was confused near the end. She was emotional. She wanted to give pieces of herself away to anyone who made her feel useful." Elise's expression sharpened, but her voice stayed calm for Naomi's sake. "Do not reduce her kindness because it became inconvenient." The fire snapped softly. William looked down at the letter and slid one finger beneath the flap. The seal opened with a faint tear that seemed louder than the rain. Inside were 2 pages, folded once. The handwriting was thinner than he remembered from younger years, but unmistakably Clara's, each curve of each letter a hand reaching across time. He began to read silently, but after the first line, his breath caught. Naomi leaned closer to her mother. Margaret turned away from the mantel. William read aloud, voice low. "My dearest William, if this letter has reached you, then the song found its way home, and so did the child I could not protect openly." He stopped. The room blurred, and he had to press his thumb against the paper to steady himself. Elise lowered her gaze. Naomi touched her bracelet. William continued, "You will want facts, because facts are where you hide when pain becomes too much. So here are the facts. Years before we married, your father created a private education and care trust for descendants connected to the Harrington household staff after an accident on the Old River property changed several lives. That trust was meant to protect families who had served this house for generations. Your mother honored it quietly. After she died, Margaret and the family attorneys buried it." Margaret's voice broke in. "That trust was outdated. It was legally complicated." William did not look up. "Clara says it was buried." Margaret went silent. He continued reading. "Elise Brooks is the granddaughter of Ruth Brooks, the woman who helped your mother keep this house human. Ruth never asked for what she was owed. Elise never knew what had been promised. When I learned the truth, I tried to reopen the trust, but I was blocked by people who said scandal would damage your legacy. William, listen to me. A legacy that cannot survive fairness is not worth preserving." The words entered the room like Clara herself had spoken them. William's face crumpled for 1 second, not into tears exactly, but into the naked expression of a man who had just heard his wife's conscience outlive his own. Naomi whispered, "Mama, was Grandma Ruth the one in your stories?" Elise nodded. "Yes, baby." William turned to the second page. "There is more," he said. Margaret stepped forward. "William, stop reading in front of the child." Naomi lifted her chin. "I know how to hear hard things if people say them kindly." William looked at her, and the steadiness in her small face gave him permission to continue carefully. Naomi should never be made to feel like a claim, a problem, or a secret. She is a child. She is not responsible for what adults hid. If she is standing before you, it means the world became too cold, and Elise trusted me enough to let my song guide her. Please do not fail them because you are grieving me. Love them because you loved me. The last sentence emptied the room of every excuse. William lowered the letter. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he stood, crossed to the window, and looked out at Clara's white roses bending beneath the rain. He had spent 9 years building towers with his name on them, while a promise made under his own roof waited in the dark. Behind him, Naomi's voice came softly. "Mr. Harrington?" He turned. She was looking at him not with demand, but with concern. Are you okay? The question nearly undid him. A child had arrived cold, wet, and carrying an old truth, and still she was asking after him. William walked back, knelt in front of her as he had at the gate, and held Clara's letter between them. No, he said honestly, but I think I can become better than okay if I stop hiding from what she wanted me to see. Then he looked at Elise. Tomorrow morning, I will reopen the trust. Tonight, you and Naomi will not leave through the rain unless you choose to. There are guest rooms upstairs, warm clothes, and breakfast in the morning. No conditions. No publicity. No performance. Elise's eyes filled, but she held herself steady. We are not charity. No, William said. You are Clara's unfinished justice. Margaret made a small sound, almost a protest, almost a sob, but no words came. Naomi looked toward the French doors where the garden shimmered in the dark. Can I see the roses? William stood and offered his hand, not as ownership, not as rescue, but as an invitation. Yes, he said. I think they have been waiting for you. The rain softened just enough for the garden to receive them. William opened the French doors from the blue room, and cool air moved inside, carrying the scent of wet earth and white roses. Naomi stepped out first, still wrapped in his evening coat, with Elise close behind and William a few paces to the side. He did not rush them. He did not explain the garden as if wealth had made it important. He simply walked with them along the stone path Clara had designed years ago, when the house was brighter and William still believed time would always give him another chance to listen. Small lights glowed beneath the rose bushes, turning every raindrop into a pinprick of gold. Naomi moved slowly, her sneakers whispering over the damp stone, her eyes searching the garden like she had been here before in a story. At the center stood a small marble bench beneath an arbor of white, climbing roses. Beside it was a bronze statue of a bird with one wing lifted, simple and graceful, almost hidden by leaves. Naomi stopped so suddenly that Elise almost touched her shoulder. That is it, Naomi whispered. William turned. That is what? Naomi pointed to the statue. The bird. Mama had a picture. I used to think it was from a park. Elise looked at the statue, then at William. Her face carried recognition and sorrow together. Clara gave me that photograph the same day she gave me the letter. She said if Naomi ever doubted the house was real, I should show her the bird. William walked closer to the statue. He had passed it hundreds of times over 9 years and seen only grief arranged in bronze. Clara had chosen it after her diagnosis, telling him a bird did not need 2 lifted wings to mean hope. He had nodded then, distracted by calls, doctors, decisions, always believing he would ask what she meant later. Later had become a room he could never enter. Naomi approached the bird and lightly touched the rein on its wing. Miss Clara liked things that still looked brave, she said. William closed his eyes. Yes, he answered. She did. For the first time that night, Margaret did not follow. She remained inside, visible through the glass, a pale figure near the fire, watching the garden as if the roses themselves had become witnesses. William saw her reflection for a moment and felt the old instinct to protect his family from embarrassment. Then he looked at Naomi, at Elise, at the bracelet shining under his coat sleeve, and understood how often embarrassment had been used by powerful people as a prettier word for silence. Elise, he said quietly, what happened after Margaret came to your apartment? Elise stood beneath the arbor, one hand resting on the back of the marble bench. She brought papers. I was exhausted, working double shifts, trying to keep Naomi healthy, trying not to drown in bills. She said Clara had been generous, but that accepting anything more would drag Naomi into a world that would judge her before it knew her name. William's jaw tightened. Elise continued, steady but careful, because Naomi was listening. She offered money. Not much compared to this place, but enough to tempt a scared young mother. I did not take it. I kept the bracelet, the song, and the letter because those were not hers to buy back. Naomi looked up at her mother, pride rising quietly in her face. You said no? Elise brushed moisture from Naomi's cheek with her thumb. I said no because you were not a secret to be paid away. William looked toward the house. Margaret had lowered her head behind the glass. I should have known, he said. Elise did not comfort him with an easy lie. Maybe, but Clara knew how grief works. She knew people could stand in the same house and still not see the same truth. The words entered William gently, which made them hurt more. He had been present for Clara's illness, but presence was not the same as attention. He had funded research, hired specialists, made calls from hospital corridors, and slept in chairs beside her bed. Yet somehow she had carried this alone, because perhaps she knew that when a man was terrified of losing love, he might not know how to receive justice at the same time. Naomi sat on the marble bench and looked around the garden. "Did Mr. Harrington make the roses?" she asked. William gave a small, sad smile. "No, Clara did. I only paid for them." Naomi considered that with the seriousness of a judge. Paying is still something, but planting is different. Elise almost smiled. William looked at the child, and there it was again, that clean little blade of truth. "You are right," he said. "Planting is different." The rain thinned to mist. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, traffic hissed along the wet Charleston streets. The city was still moving, still eating late dinners, still closing shops, still unaware that in a billionaire's garden, an old promise had begun breathing again. William reached into his pocket and removed Clara's letter, now folded carefully. "There may be records," he said. "If the trust existed, there will be documents, attorneys, bank filings, tax records. My father was proud, but he was thorough." Elise's expression grew guarded. "And if those records say what Clara said, then I make it right." Making it right is not only writing checks. William nodded. "I know." He looked at Naomi, who was still touching the bird statue. "It means telling the truth without turning your daughter into a headline. It means restoring what was promised without making Elise beg for it. It means asking what you need instead of deciding what looks generous from my side of the gate." Elise studied him in the garden light, searching for the difference between remorse and resolve. "That is a good start," she said at last. Naomi looked between them. "Does this mean we have to move into a mansion?" The question came so earnestly that William almost laughed, and the sound surprised him. It was small and rusty, but real. Elise shook her head. "No, baby." William smiled gently. "Definitely not unless you want to. And even then your mother would have a great deal to say about it." Naomi seemed relieved. "Good." Big houses echo. William looked back at Harrington House, its windows glowing across the lawn. "Yes," he said softly. "They do." Then Naomi did something that changed the night again. She stood beneath the arbor, closed her eyes, and began to hum the song. Not loudly, not as a performance, just enough for the garden to hear. Elise's face softened. William stood motionless as the melody moved between the roses, no longer a ghost from the past, but a living thread held in a child's careful voice. Inside the house, Margaret lifted her head. Through the glass, William saw her cover her mouth as if the sound had reached a place she had spent years trying to guard. Naomi finished the final note and opened her eyes. "Mama says songs remember people better than stone does." William looked at Clara's bird, then at the roses, then at Naomi. "Your mother is right." A moment later, Mr. Ellison appeared at the French doors, holding an old leather folder in both hands. His face was pale with restrained emotion. "Sir," he called softly, "I believe you should see this." William walked back toward the doorway. "What is it?" Mr. Ellison looked past him to Elise, then to Naomi, then down at the folder. Mrs. Harrington left instructions in the household archive. They were filed under the garden plans. William stopped. The mist clung to his tuxedo. The letter rested against his heart, and behind him, Naomi's bracelet caught the light from the roses. Clara had not left only a song. She had left a trail. William took the leather folder from Mr. Ellison with the careful hands of a man accepting something that might change the shape of his life. The folder was dark brown, softened at the corners, and tied with a faded ivory ribbon that Clara used to wrap around garden clippings when she pressed flowers between books. For a moment, he did not open it. He stood just inside the French doors, rainwater shining on his tuxedo, while Naomi, Elise, and Mr. Ellison gathered near the threshold and Margaret remained by the mantel, her face unreadable in the firelight. "Where did you find this?" William asked. Mr. Ellison folded his hands in front of him. "In the household archive, sir." Mrs. Harrington kept a separate drawer for garden sketches, seed orders, and landscaping receipts. This was beneath the original plan for the white rose arbor. William looked toward the garden through the glass. The arbor stood in the mist like a question Clara had planted years ago. He untied the ribbon. Inside the folder were copies of legal documents, handwritten notes, a small map of the property, and a sealed envelope labeled in Clara's hand. If Naomi comes. The child's name, written by a woman who had passed away when Naomi was too young to remember her, seemed to lift every sound out of the room. Naomi stared at it. Elise covered her mouth with one hand. Margaret's eyes closed briefly, not in grief, but in the exhausted way of someone hearing a locked door open from the other side. William's voice was barely above a whisper. She knew your name. Naomi stepped closer, still wrapped in his coat. How could she know? Elise answered softly, though her eyes stayed on the envelope. I told her. After you were born, I brought you to the garden once. Clara was already very sick, but she wanted to see you. You slept the whole time. Naomi looked up at her mother. I was here before? Elise nodded, tears shining but not falling. Once, she held your little hand and sang to you. She said you had the calmest face she had ever seen. William pressed his fingers against the folder. The thought of Clara sitting in the garden with a baby he had never known about, singing through illness, leaving instructions beneath Rose's plans, was almost too much to bear. Why did no one tell me? He asked, but the question was not only for Elise. It moved across the room and stopped at Margaret. Margaret lifted her chin. Because you were losing your wife. William looked at her with quiet disbelief. So you decided I should lose the truth too? Margaret's composure cracked. I decided you should survive. No, Elise said gently but firmly. You decided what survival was allowed to look like. The words did not shout. They did not need to. Margaret looked at Elise as if the younger woman had taken something from her, when in truth Elise had only refused to surrender what Clara had placed in her care. William opened the envelope labeled for Naomi. Inside was a single page and a pressed white rose, browned at the edges but still whole. He read silently at first. His eyes moved slowly, then stopped. Naomi waited without asking, but her hands found the bracelet again. William lowered himself into the armchair near the fire and read aloud with a tenderness that made every word feel newly alive. Dear Naomi, if you are hearing this, then you have grown old enough to follow a song. And that means your mother taught you courage the way I hoped she would. I met you once, in my rose garden, when you were small enough to sleep through the whole world. You will not remember me, and that is all right. Some love is not meant to be remembered by the mind. Some love waits in the life someone else protected for you. Naomi stood very still. Elise's arm rested around her shoulders. William continued, his voice roughening. This house has made many people feel small. I am sorry for every door that was closed before you arrived. I cannot promise the people inside it will understand you quickly, but I can promise this. You were never meant to stand outside forever. Naomi's eyes glistened. She did not cry loudly or dramatically. She simply breathed in as if the words had reached a place she had kept folded up. William, read the final lines. If William is reading this, then I trust he has remembered the man he was before the world taught him to confuse wealth with wisdom. Let the trust be opened. Let Ruth Brooks be honored. Let Elise stand without shame. And let Naomi choose her own future, not as charity, not as scandal, but as a child whose life was always worthy of room. The fire snapped. The rain softened against the windows. William held the letter in both hands and bowed his head. Clara had written many beautiful things in her life, but this was not merely beautiful. This was instruction. This was love with a spine. Mr. Ellison cleared his throat softly and opened the documents in the folder. Sir, there is an inventory list here. It references the Brooks Education and Care Trust, created by your father in 1989 and revised by your mother in 1996. There are account numbers, attorney names, and a schedule of distributions that appear to have stopped after your mother's death. William looked up slowly. Stopped by whom? Mr. Ellison hesitated. Margaret answered before he could. By the Board of Family Trustees. William's gaze found hers. You were chair. I was 29, Margaret said, the first tremor entering her voice. Father was gone. Mother was gone. You were building the company and barely home. The attorney said the language was old, vague, dangerous. They said families would appear claiming connections. They said the press would twist it. And Clara? William asked. What did Clara say when she found out? Margaret's eyes shone. She said we had turned gratitude into a locked account. William looked at the legal pages. Numbers appeared in neat columns, cold and precise. Scholarships never paid. Medical support never delivered. Housing assistance never offered. The money had sat untouched, gaining interest while people it was meant to help worked 2 jobs, missed opportunities, and carried silence like an inheritance. Elise looked at the floor. Naomi looked at the adults, trying to understand enough without being asked to carry too much. William saw that and closed the folder halfway. Naomi, he said gently, some of this is grown-up business. Not because you are not smart enough, but because children should not have to listen to adults count what should have been kindness. Naomi considered that, then nodded. But it is about my family too. Yes, William said. And you will be told the truth in a way that protects your heart. That answer seemed to satisfy her. She sat beside Elise on the sofa, her small hand resting in her mother's. Margaret sank at last into the chair near the mantel, all elegance drained from her. I thought I was protecting the Harrington name, she said. William looked at Clara's portrait. Clara was protecting the Harrington soul. The difference filled the room. Margaret covered her face for a moment, then lowered her hands. I cannot undo it. No, William said. But you can stop defending it. Elise spoke then, her voice quiet. I do not want Naomi dragged into courtrooms or cameras. William turned to her immediately. She will not be. We begin with attorneys privately. Independent counsel for you. Paid by the trust, not by me personally. Full accounting. No press. No family pressure. No signatures tonight. Elise studied him. You understand why I need my own lawyer? I would insist on it, William said. Naomi looked up. Does a lawyer help people say things the right way? William almost smiled. A good one does. Then Mama should get the best one, Naomi said. Because she says things right already, but people with money listen better when another grown-up repeats it. For the second time that night, William laughed softly, sadly, honestly. You may be the smartest person in this house. Naomi shook her head. No, sir. I just listen. William looked at Margaret when Naomi said that, and Margaret looked down. Mr. Ellison gathered the documents carefully. Shall I place these in the study safe, sir? William shook his head. No, they stay here tonight. He looked at Elise. You should have copies before morning. Then he turned to Naomi, who had begun to look sleepy now that the warmth of the room had found her. The rain, the walk, the fear, the singing, the truth, all of it had settled over her small shoulders. William lowered his voice. There is a guest room upstairs with a view of the garden. You and your mother can rest there, or I can have a driver take you home whenever you wish. Naomi looked at Elise, leaving the choice where it belonged. Elise hesitated, then glanced toward the wet windows. We can stay tonight. Naomi leaned into her mother with relief, too quiet for anyone careless to notice. William noticed. Clara would have noticed too. As Mr. Ellison led Elise and Naomi toward the staircase, Naomi paused at the bottom step and looked back at William. Mr. Harrington? Yes. When I sang outside, were you sad because it was her song? William stood beneath Clara's portrait, holding the folder against his chest. At first, he said, but now I think I was sad because I did not know the song still had work to do. Naomi nodded, accepting the answer as if songs having work made perfect sense. Then she followed her mother upstairs, the oversized coat trailing behind her like a shadow of a world that had finally opened its door. By sunrise, Harrington House looked less like a mansion and more like a place recovering from a storm. Pale gold light spread across the wet lawn, caught on the iron gate, and settled gently over the white roses that had survived the night with their petals bowed but unbroken. Upstairs, in the guest room overlooking the garden, Naomi woke before her mother. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. The ceiling was high, the curtains were cream-colored and heavy, and the bed was so soft it seemed to hold her carefully instead of simply holding her weight. Then she saw her purple backpack on the chair, her canvas tote on the dresser, and William Harrington's black evening coat folded neatly at the foot of the bed by someone who had treated it, and her, with care. Elise slept in the chair near the window, still wearing her work pants and a borrowed sweater Mr. Ellison had brought her late in the night. Naomi slipped out of bed without waking her and walked to the glass. Below, the rose garden glowed in the new morning, and at its center, the bronze bird lifted one wing toward the sky. Naomi touched the silver bracelet on her wrist. Good morning, Miss Clara, she whispered, not because she expected an answer, but because some names felt rude to ignore. Downstairs, William had not slept at all. He sat in the study with his tie loosened, Clara's letters spread across the desk, the leather folder open beside an untouched cup of black coffee. The study windows faced east, and the first light revealed what lamplight had hidden. The documents were not vague memories, not sentimental fragments, but organized proof. Trust papers, trustee signatures, annual statements, letters from Clara to attorneys, notes from Ruth Brooks, written decades earlier in careful script. Every page seemed to say the same thing in a different language. Someone had promised fairness, and someone else had quietly postponed it until postponement became denial. Mr. Ellison entered just after 6:30 with fresh coffee and a gray folder. Mr. Adler is willing to come at 9, he said. He is retired, but he remembers the Harrington family trust structure. He also recommended an independent attorney for Miss Brooks, a woman named Patricia Coleman in North Charleston. He says she is excellent and not easily impressed. William looked up with tired eyes. Good. Call her office as soon as it opens. Tell them this is urgent, but not public. Mr. Ellison nodded. Yes, sir. William leaned back, rubbing one hand over his face. And Margaret? In the breakfast room. She asked for tea. She has not left. William rose slowly, taking Clara's final letter with him. The hallway was quiet except for the old house, settling into morning. In the breakfast room, Margaret sat at the far end of the table, untouched tea before her, her hair pinned perfectly despite the sleepless night. She looked less like the sharp guardian of the Harrington name now and more like a woman trapped inside the consequences of a decision she had once convinced herself was practical. William stood in the doorway. I need the names of every attorney who advised you to bury the trust. Margaret did not look up. Good morning to you too. It is not a good morning yet. She closed her eyes briefly. William, I was not the only one. I know. The trustees agreed. The attorneys warned us. The family office said reopening it would invite claims we could not verify. And Clara verified Elise. Margaret's face tightened. Clara was dying. She was emotional. William stepped into the room, his voice low but immovable. Do not say that again as a way to make her truth smaller. Margaret's lips trembled. For the first time, no polished sentence came to save her. I thought if you had one more thing to grieve, it would finish you. William stared at her, and the anger in him moved aside just enough for sadness to appear. You did not trust me to be better. Margaret looked toward the window. I did not trust the world to be kind to them. Then you should have stood beside them when it was not. The words landed quietly. Margaret bowed her head. A soft sound came from the doorway. Naomi stood there in borrowed slippers, her braids freshly smoothed by Elise, who appeared behind her a second later with worry in her eyes. Naomi looked from William to Margaret and seemed to understand that she had stepped into the end of an adult conversation. I am sorry, she said. We were looking for the kitchen. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. The room might have hardened. It might have returned to the shape of class, race, money, and old fear. Instead, Margaret's face broke with a tired honesty she had resisted all night. You do not need to apologize for entering a room in a house where your family should have been welcomed. Naomi blinked. Elise went still. William watched his sister carefully, not ready to forgive, but willing to hear truth when it finally arrived without armor. Margaret stood, slowly, then looked at Elise. I was wrong. Elise did not soften quickly. She did not owe anyone speed. Yes, she said. You were. Margaret accepted the sentence with a small nod. I cannot ask you to trust me. No, Elise replied. You cannot. Naomi looked down at her bracelet, then back at Margaret. But you can tell the truth now. Margaret inhaled as if the child had placed a mirror in her hands. Yes, she whispered. I can do that. William pulled out a chair for Elise and another for Naomi. Breakfast arrived soon after, not as a grand display, but as warm oatmeal, scrambled eggs, biscuits, strawberries, orange juice, and coffee. Naomi looked at the table with open surprise, then waited until her mother nodded before eating. William noticed the habit and felt again the quiet education of scarcity, the way a child learned to ask the world for permission before accepting enough. He did not comment. He only passed the strawberry bowl closer. At 9:15, the attorneys arrived through the side entrance. Patricia Coleman came first, a composed black woman in her 40s with a navy suit, a leather briefcase, and eyes that seemed to read a room before anyone introduced themselves. She shook Elise's hand first, then Naomi's, then William's. That order did not escape him, and he respected her immediately for it. Miss Brooks, Patricia said, sitting beside Elise. I am here for you and your daughter. Not for Mr. Harrington. Not for the Harrington family office. Before anything is signed or discussed in detail, I will review the documents independently and explain your options in plain English. Elise released a breath she had been holding. Thank you. Naomi leaned toward her mother and whispered, She talks like Principal Davis when somebody is in trouble. Patricia heard and smiled. That is not far off. The retired trust attorney, Harold Adler, arrived 10 minutes later with a cane, a wool blazer, and a face full of old concern. When he saw the documents, his expression changed from curiosity to recognition. I remember Ruth Brooks, he said softly. Your mother insisted the trust include her descendants. She said the Brooks family had given more to this house than any ledger could show. William looked at Elise. Elise looked down, absorbing the dignity of a grandmother being named properly in a room that had once erased her. For the next hour, the adults spoke carefully. Naomi sat near the window with a sketchpad Mr. Ellison had found, drawing the bronze bird from memory. The conversation was calm, but every page turned carried weight. Harold confirmed that the trust had not been dissolved. It had been frozen under administrative review for nearly 2 decades, a phrase so clean it almost hid how cruel it was. Patricia asked sharp questions. Margaret answered them. Not perfectly, not comfortably, but truthfully. By late morning, William stood at the head of the table and placed both hands flat on the wood. The trust will be restored. Full accounting. Back distributions calculated. Education funds opened immediately. Housing support made available if Miss Brooks chooses it. And Ruth Brooks will be formally recognized in the family foundation records. Elise looked at Patricia, who gave a small nod that meant the promise would still need paperwork, but the direction was real. Naomi looked up from her drawing. Does that mean Mama can go back to nursing school? The question was so simple that it cut through every legal term in the room. Elise turned to her daughter, startled by the dreams spoken aloud. William looked at Elise. If she wants to. Elise's eyes shone. I wanted to for a long time. Naomi smiled then, not big, not careless, but bright enough to change the room. Margaret looked at that smile and quietly began to cry. No one rushed to comfort her. Some tears were not meant to be rewarded. Some were only the sound of a wall finally cracking. William walked to the window where Naomi's drawing lay on the sill. She had drawn the bird with one wing lifted, but beneath it she had added a small girl, a garden, and a gate standing open. He pointed gently. Is that us? Naomi shook her head. Not all of us. She picked up the pencil and added white roses on both sides of the path. Now it is. William looked out at Clara's garden, then back at the child who had carried a song through rain and into a house that had forgotten how to listen. For the first time, he understood that reopening the trust was only the beginning. The real work was not unlocking money. It was unlocking every door that had taught a child to stand outside and sing before she was believed. By noon, the rain had ended, and Charleston wore the clean brightness that comes after a storm. Sunlight touched the wet brick streets, flashed across puddles beside the curb, and turned the iron gate of Harrington House from black to silver. Inside the mansion, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, because truth had weight, but clearer, as if every room had finally opened a window. The attorneys had gone to begin their work. Mr. Ellison moved quietly through the foyer, removing the last white roses from the canceled memorial dinner and replacing them with fresh ones from the garden. Margaret sat alone in the library, writing the first of several statements Patricia Coleman had requested, not for the press, not for sympathy, but for the record. For once, she did not polish the truth until it became harmless. She wrote what she had done, what she had hidden, and what she had allowed fear to call wisdom. In the breakfast room, Elise stood near the window with a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, watching Naomi kneel beside the low table as she finished her drawing of the garden. William entered with a folder, but he did not open it. He had spent most of his life entering rooms with papers that controlled outcomes. This time, he wanted to enter as a man before he entered as a billionaire. Miss Brooks, he said gently. Elise turned. William is fine, if we are going to be speaking with lawyers for the next several months. The corner of his mouth lifted. Then Elise is fine too, I hope. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Elise is fine. Naomi looked up from her drawing. Does that mean I can call you Mr. William? He looked at her, and the old ache in him warmed into something almost like laughter. I would like that. Naomi smiled and returned to shading the bronze bird. William set the folder on the table but kept his hand on top of it. Patricia asked me to be careful not to make promises before everything is reviewed. She is right. So I will say only what I can say truthfully today. The trust will pay for your independent counsel. It will cover Naomi's education. It will support your nursing program if you choose to return. Housing assistance will be offered, not forced. Every decision will move through you first. Elise listened, without blinking. Years of being underestimated had taught her not to mistake beautiful sentences for safety. And the family name? She asked. What happens when people find out? William glanced toward the hallway where Clara's portrait hung. They will find out only what you choose to share. Ruth Brooks will be honored publicly because she deserves that. But Naomi's private life remains private. No cameras. No interviews. No charity photographs. No one using her face to repair our reputation. Elise's shoulders lowered just a little. That matters. It should have mattered before. The answer was simple, and because it was simple, Elise believed it more than she expected to. Naomi stood and carried her drawing to him. I made the gate open, she said. William took the paper carefully. In the picture, the mansion was smaller than the garden, the roses were taller than the walls, and the gate stood wide with no guard beside it. A small girl held her mother's hand on the path, while an older man stood a little behind them, not leading, not rescuing, just walking the same way. Near the bird statue, Naomi had drawn another figure in a pale dress made of quick pencil lines. Is that Clara? William asked softly. Naomi nodded. Not like a ghost, just like remembering. William pressed his lips together and looked toward the window until the room steadied. That is exactly right. Later that afternoon, they walked outside together. Elise had agreed to stay one more night while arrangements were made, not because she had surrendered caution, but because she had chosen rest for herself and her daughter. William carried no umbrella now. The garden paths had dried at the edges, and the white roses lifted their faces back toward the sun. Naomi walked ahead, then slowed so William could join her near the bronze bird. Mr. William, she said, do you think Miss Clara knew I would come on the day with all the flowers? William looked back at the house, where the memorial arrangements still glowed in the windows. I do not know. Then he thought of Clara's letters hidden beneath garden plans, the pressed rose, the song carried through years by a mother who had refused to sell it, and the child who had trusted a melody enough to follow it through rain. But I think she knew love sometimes needs a day when people are already listening. Naomi accepted that with a small nod. Mama says grown-ups miss a lot when they are busy hurting. William smiled sadly. Your mother is very wise. She is going to be a nurse, Naomi said proudly. Then she will have a profession worthy of her, William replied. Elise, standing a few feet away, heard him and looked down with a smile she tried to hide. Margaret came into the garden just before sunset. She did not wear pearls now. She wore a plain gray sweater, and her face looked tired in a way no makeup could correct. She stopped several feet from Elise and Naomi, leaving space instead of claiming it. I am not asking for forgiveness, she said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its old command. I have no right to ask quickly, but I gave Patricia the names, the letters, and the trustee records I kept. I will cooperate with everything. Elise looked at her for a long moment. Naomi stood close to her mother, but not behind her. That is what you should do, Elise said. Margaret nodded. Yes. Naomi looked at Margaret, then at the roses. Miss Clara said people should not stand outside forever. Margaret's eyes filled. She did. Naomi considered her carefully. Maybe that means you can come back inside after you tell all the truth. No one spoke. The mercy in the child's sentence was not cheap. It had a condition, and somehow that made it stronger. Margaret bowed her head. I will try. As evening settled, the four of them stood near the arbor while the house lights came on one by one behind them. William asked Mr. Ellison to bring Clara's small music box from the blue room, the one that no longer played because its spring had broken years ago. He placed it on the marble bench beside Naomi's drawing. Clara loved this, he said. It stopped working after she passed, and I never had it repaired. Naomi touched the lid with one finger. Maybe it was waiting for the right song. Then, without being asked, she began to sing. Her voice was soft at first, almost hidden beneath the evening sounds of crickets, distant traffic, and wind moving through the roses. Elise joined on the second line. her lower voice steadying the melody. William did not sing. Not yet. He stood with his hands folded, eyes shining, letting the song return to him without demanding that it heal everything at once. When the final line came, Naomi looked at him, and this time he sang it with them, barely above a whisper. When the world gets cold, follow the roses home. The words did not bring Clara back. They did something gentler. They made room for what she had left. William looked at Naomi and saw not a secret, not a claim, not a symbol of charity, but a child with a future that would no longer depend on locked gates. He looked at Elise and saw the strength Clara had trusted. He looked at Margaret and saw a wound that would require truth before peace. Then he looked at the open garden path, bright under the first stars, and understood the real inheritance Clara had protected. It was not money, although money would now do what it should have done long ago. It was not reputation, because reputation had failed the moment it chose silence over fairness. It was the courage to let love become justice. Naomi finished the last note and leaned against her mother, sleepy but peaceful. William picked up her drawing and held it beside Clara's music box. "May I keep this in the blue room?" he asked. Naomi thought about it. "Only if you do not shut the door all the time." William smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes. "I will not." That night, the blue room door stayed open. Clara's letters rested safely on the table. Naomi's drawing stood beside the photograph on the mantel. The roses outside glowed under the moon, and for the first time in 9 years, Harrington House did not sound empty. It sounded like a song had found its way home.